Currently, we are being bombarded with threatening messages about climate change. And whether you believe in it or not, one thing is for sure, we are in an energy transition. And it seems as if everyone needs to adapt, consumers and businesses. So today I'm going to talk about the energy transition in a broader sense, and specifically what it means for the industry. I'm going to do this with Ennio Senese, the COO of OHROS Group.
Right.
For the people who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and maybe where we are walking?
Yeah. By the way, we are in a very nice setting of Amsterdijk golf course in Amstelveen. We selected this place because it's normally quite peaceful, and the only thing that you see is or hear is golf balls flying around and cows and remote and sheep and ducks and whatever. So actually it's quite a nice setting, but my background is for 40 years now almost. I'm a management consultant, strategy by guild, oil and gas for more than 27 years, energy overall 30 years, and it's not cumulative, otherwise I would be a very old man. My background is with companies like Shell, Accenture, A.T. Kearney, the usual suspects in the big five consulting environments. And indeed, now I'm both a partner in the group, chief operating officer with OHROS Group.
So you do have a lot of experience.
I guess so, yeah, after 40 years.
Yeah, nice. This energy transition is a full design and execution at the same time.
Right.
For people who don't really know or who are not really aware of what it means, how would you define it?
The energy transition as such?
Yeah.
Well, the energy transition is basically going from anything that has hydrocarbons in it to going to net zero. Net zero means zero emission of CO2 and any type of COx emissions. And that's having said that, when you hear politicians, it's always like, that sounds like an easy journey. It is not.
They make it look easy.
Yeah, they make it look easy, but it's definitely not easy, and it's definitely not something that you can execute at command, because it has a major impact in everything we do, in everything we live through, in our workplace. There is nothing in our lives that is not impacted by the energy transition, and that's from a micro perspective. But then if you look at from a macro perspective, the industries that have to lead the energy transition, for them it's truly a major challenge.
Yeah. So if I understand it clearly, we're going from the traditional fossil fuels as we know it. We're trying to cut that and replace it with renewable energy, green energy.
That's on the energy side of things. But the reason why this is the objective, because using fossil fuels is causing emissions.
Yeah.
And according to the climate change, to the climate experts out there, the major opinion is that the climate change is caused by CO2 emissions, and as a consequence, policies have been made in order to reduce the CO2 emissions, and hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, is the main source of that.
Yeah, so that's one of the goals, to be have zero emissions by 2050?
Yeah, 2050, but there are some objectives and targets on, if you look at the Paris Climate Agreement, that's 2035 is already a first year of...
It's like very, that's around the corner.
Yeah. The issue with that is that although those kind of targets had been set, it has not been really thought through well enough. What the impact is even at a capital level of industries in general. We hear an airplane passing by, and it has a major impact on airlines. And as you see, often airlines and the air industry is kind of left outside of the equation often. Airports are left out of the equation when it comes to the CO2 emission burden. They often convert that to to industries and farmers. But when it's economically inconvenient, you find often that it's kind of obliterated from the schemes. Also for the airline companies, it's a major issue because, of course, kerosene is, the CO2 emissions flying around is quite heavy, and everyone knows this, by the way.
Yeah.
So it has an impact in almost every industry, and it is in the total supply chain and value chain. There is a lot of emission in every step of the process.
Countries and governments have committed to reach certain sustainable development goals.
That's the essence.
And what does that mean for the industry in itself?
Oh, it means an awful lot. No one can really have objections against being green and clean, right?
Cleaner,
So that's all wonderful. But the impact that it has on the industries is enormous. From an operational perspective, because you need to change processes, you need to change your operations, you need to change even business objectives. You need to insert different KPIs, key performance indicators in your objectives list, and basically drill that down all the way to an operational level if you are in a manufacturing environment. And but the big ticket on this is the financial economic impact, because if you need to change your machinery, if you need to change your equipment, if you need to source different type of materials, and most of all in the energy intensive industries like the steel industry or any heavy industry that requires a lot of energy, the electricity that you require in a manufacturing site, where does it come from? Well, for example, refineries often have their own power plant to supply their electricity in the refinery, but that's not a given for other asset-intensive industries. And the question is, if you have to change that gradually, how does it look? The other one is, for example, the power generation industry. So in the Netherlands, for example, you got a couple of major coal-fired power plants that have now been recently commissioned. So they're pretty new, and not suddenly, but to some extent unexpectedly, they now have to shut down or reduce their output, and or even being completely decommissioned or sold. That means that the depreciation and the return on investment type of scheme for these companies that were normally anywhere between 20 and 30 years has now been reduced to sometimes, without naming the companies, but it's like 5 years, and someone has to pay.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if it's government imposed, then the taxpayer is going to pay, right? So someone has to pay because that money is otherwise lost. And when you talk with companies, well, these companies, because they are harshly faced with, imposed changes, and they have very little choice to do differently.
Don't we all?
Yeah, but the
some
impact,
extent.
the impact for us is, even in absolute numbers. Well, in absolute numbers, it's definitely a different story. But even relatively, it's still more digestible for a single individual than it is for, a very, let's say, sophisticated industry.
Yeah.
Like what you then often find if you have interviews with, like I have interviews with CEOs and managing directors of heavy industry energy sector, you find that the energy transition readiness is perceived as being there, but if you really ask certain questions about aspects of their supply chain.
Yeah, do you think business is already?
To be fair, I don't think the majority of companies is really having a complete realization of what needs to be done.
It requires a lot. Like, how can you keep track on it? How can you be aware of what you need to change and how to change it to actually reach those goals?
Yeah, so the idea is that this is something completely new, for industries to invent how they go to a net zero type of approach for their industry, or as close as they can get. So there is CO2 storage. There is if we can't reduce the CO2, that we're going to compensate by reforestate the Amazon or things like that. Well, by the way, it's not an entirely fair.
Then does it reduce emission?
Well, it doesn't reduce the emission, but then it would compensate because the absorption of the CO2 would then, you basically invest in absorbing the CO2 that you emit there are all kinds of strange and theoretical calculations to that, which, are on paper helpful, but, I strongly doubt whether that in reality is really making a difference or an impact at all. Now, the challenge with companies is that if you don't really know, because no one has done it before, this is new. So you put your mind, your bright minds together, and you start to map and identify how to do that. Solutions will be found, right? And for specific industries, it requires a specific roadmap. Now, a proper way to assess that roadmap is using asset management, top quality asset management, as a foundation to check whether you are on track. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, at UMS we have identified and already did some.
Wait, before you go there, for people who don't know what asset management is, Swedish short.
Okay, asset management is the management of your equipment to the best of its possibilities. So meaning that it's not just operations. So how can you operate the best way an equipment? How can you operate it in the best way? How can you maintain it in the best way? But not just from an operational perspective, but also from a strategic perspective. When do you acquire? How do you spend your capex? How do you source it? The whole complexity around the perception of needing a certain piece of equipment, to scope it, what it is that you need, and then to source it, and then to identify the return on investment type of, calculations. All of these things makes it that total package makes it makes asset management.
But UMS does a lot more than just asset management, right?
Yes. So UMS is a company, an American-founded company, New Jersey-based, that started 34 years ago with the idea of benchmarking the performance of utility companies. Utilities, that is power generation, power transmission, and power distribution. So those are the three key domains within the utility space. And UMS is one of the boutique niche companies that really has all this data benchmarking of more than 400 companies worldwide in different areas of operations, and we benchmark that. So that's how it started, and that's one leg. The second leg is consulting. So we basically help companies identify what the gaps are in their performance, and then we can help them closing those gaps and becoming better in a specific area of their operation or even strategy, because we also help companies design short and long-term strategies.
And I think, I don't know what your opinion is when it comes to that, but I think when it comes to the energy transition, information, data is very important.
Yes.
If you want to learn how to adapt and, reduce emissions, how to change your processes, you need data, you need information.
Yes, correct.
You need the knowledge around it.
Absolutely, yeah. The thing with data and information is that if a company tries to help itself, tries to improve itself, the only element of data, if they're not going to purchase it outside from different sources that are not always extremely reliable, they find it difficult to see how they can perform and how they can improve their performance. So what we do is basically bring them all together and apples with apples, compare where company A is compared to company B, etc. And then we put them together and we give them that output. So one could say, okay, so I'm a best performer in line A or line 1, and company B is the worst performer in line 1. And what is the gap? And then company B may want to improve their line 1 performance, and we can help them with that, because we know we have done this. We are doing this for more than 34 years. But like I said, we're not going to push it, but we are in the position to help companies close that specific gap. And most of the time we can also put a number to the gap, because performance gaps always have a financial consequence, but sometimes they're difficult to quantify. But like I said, we do this for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And we have the ability to help companies identifying what the benefit is of closing the gap, for example.
Yeah.
So that's really what we do when it comes to specific performance improvement. Now, when you mention data, data is also evolving over time as well. Because when I started in consulting, data was all kind of handwritten almost, And when I started, we didn't have laptops. That's like, for some people that is.
Now you got AI.
And now we have AI, yeah. And that's the other challenge that we are faced with today, and not just the energy industry, but any industry, is that there's a huge amount of data which become really difficult to completely manage and correctly interpret it, because you can have data lakes, but to make
Data what?
data lakes, a lake, like a lake.
Lake.
Like a lake.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So we have data lakes.
Yeah.
And companies have loads of data. The challenge is to categorize data in a way that it becomes manageable. And
Relevance.
relevance comes later. First, you try to categorize the data. Out of the categories, then you try to create information, and that's where relevance comes in. So you have the information, but even if you have the information, it's still not enough, because information then should lead to intel, and the intel provides you with, at the end, what you would like to do with the data, which is use it for your decisions.
Yeah. So the interpretation of data.
So the interpretation of data leads to information. The interpretation of information leads to intelligence, and that intelligence is supposed to be the nurturing for decision-making platforms, or even manual decision-making, in a sense that you got data and then someone needs to decide, right? But you now also have algorithms that help you interpret in a quasi-correct way the intel that is the result of data, information, intelligence. Now, this is still a major challenge. And now having the energy transition on top of that, it's causing even more, headaches, if you like, because it adds to the complication. It adds a dimension which is impacting every part of the supply chain. And at UMS, we are trying to, we've already been successful in identifying what it means in the supply chain step by step, and applying a rigor way of identifying the data, so that we make sure that nothing is missed, that we use what we've got, and that we don't lose data, and therefore not losing information. Because if you have drone inspection on your site, there's a huge amount of data that comes almost in real time, hits your system, and it needs to be digested. And therefore also your backbone system needs to be able to digest and manage all of that. Right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty complicated.
So you named one challenge.
Yes.
Can you name a few more challenges that you think the industry is faced with?
Yes.
And where UMS can help to transition in a resilient way?
There are three key areas, right? So there's energy transition, there is resilience, and there is the digitalization. Mm-hmm. And they all can be a threat and they can be an opportunity. Mm-hmm. Resilience is related to both digitalization as well as the energy transition, but it's also related to geopolitical challenges. And the interesting thing is, when I talk with these executives about resilience, the majority of them seems to be in a let's say blissful ignorance, right? Because normally companies are generally resilient.
Yeah,
and
but I think that's one challenge right there, because you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know, but then if you are aware of that aspect, there is kind of a black box with question marks in it. But you then, in your scenario building, you bear in mind that there's a black box of unknowns, the variables, right? What I find is that the majority of companies that I speak with, and these are the majors, do not really have a concept of or awareness of the black box, let's say. So the resilience question has two sides of it. So let's say until 5-6 years ago, any company had a plan B, which was basically in relation to business continuity, financial, operational, from a supply perspective. That was kind of covered, right? So if we would have an issue with a strike, we would be able to get our supply from place X, or things like that. There was a kind of a plan in place. But now the volatility and the challenges that are on the table are a multiplier of what has been until 5-6 years ago. It has changed. What are you going to do? I ask these questions to companies. Do you have a plan in place, or do you have at least considered this? And where in your supply chain is that going to, that potential event is going to impact that particular part in your supply chain, paralyzing your manufacturing or your business? Like I said, there is a threat and there's an opportunity. The opportunity is basically also for companies to really, really review their supply chain, their value chain, and to identify their dependencies within their chain, and not just from the chain perspective, but also from an offtake perspective.
Yeah.
Because your market is going to be impacted by geopolitical events as well. And how are you going to respond?
So is this also where UMS supports with?
Yes. Because we come and we help companies. There is an awareness piece to start with, but then very pragmatically we dive into the processes with the clients, and we basically are asking all what I expect the right questions. But then again, there are many more questions that we could ask. But we have developed a set of let's say assessment and analysis, whereas the difference is an assessment is more qualitative and analysis more quantitative, but we do both at every step of the process, helping companies identifying and helping them to identify to what extent their maturity is in terms of resilience, but also the same process for the energy transition and the same process for digitalization.
Yeah.
So we use maturity scales from 1 to 5. And if you're on 1, that's not very good, and that there is space for improvement. If you are at 5, you're the guru. Yeah, you're on top of things. Okay. In many aspects of operations, many companies are at the maturity level 4 or 5, especially in the OECD countries. But when you do the check on energy transition, resilience, and digitalization, I think and I assume and I expect, and if I would extrapolate what I know from factual analysis, I would say that the majority is not even at 2 or 3.
Yeah.
On all 3 threats or all 3 challenges: energy transition, resilience, digitalization.
Any last words for clients or potential clients in the times that we are facing? Because I just foresee, and I'm not an expert, but I foresee a lot of challenges.
Yeah, like I said during the interview, every challenge is can be both a threat, can be both an opportunity. I would like to take it from an optimistic perspective and look at the opportunity that it's going to give. It's a little bit more entrepreneurial, more in the hunting domain, whereas the threat is more in a farming domain, if you get my meaning of that, right? So I think it is important to be optimistic, to be positive about the challenges that we have to face, because mankind has faced many challenges over its existence, and here we are. We could argue philosophically about whether we are on the right track or not, but a challenge would not present itself if there is no solution out there to solve it, right? And that's kind of my famous last words.
Gotcha. So you're not just there for the challenges, the threats, but also for the opportunities.
Absolutely.